We begin tonight's broadcast with a set of big numbers as pump prices spike for the 10th straight week. First, 5 pesos and 83 centavos. That's the additional cost for a liter of diesel. This will now push the cost of diesel to as much as 82 pesos per liter.
Meanwhile, motorists have to shell out an additional 3 pesos and 60 centavos for every liter of gasoline starting tomorrow. This means loading up on gas may damage you anywhere from 61 to 87 pesos per liter.
And lastly, 4 pesos and 10 centavos. That's how much you have to spend more for kerosene. Price of kerosene may now range anywhere from close to 63 pesos to 74 pesos a liter.
Good evening, I'm Gretchen Ho.
I'm Robbie Alampay. You're watching The Big Story. Have you loaded up on gas? Pump prices are set to increase tomorrow in what has got to be its biggest jump yet in recent memory.
As early as this weekend, motorists have been lining up in gas stations to fuel up. And let's find out the situation in one gas station in Marikina right now with our mobile journalist Pamela Vasquez. Pamela, magandang gabi. First off, just how much did the oil companies jack up the fuel prices? And when exactly will that take effect?
Robbie, Gretchen, Caltex, Clean Fuel, Jetty, Petrogas, Sea Oil, and Shell raised retail prices by 5 pesos and 85 centavos per liter and gasoline by 3 pesos and 60 centavos per liter. As for kerosene, Caltex, Sea Oil, and Shell increased by 4 pesos and 10 centavos per liter. The prices will take effect at 6 a.m. on March 8 for all firms, except Caltex, which will adjust their prices at 12:01 a.m. and Clean Fuel at 4:01 p.m. on the same day.
How are the motorists taking these consecutive oil price hikes?
Robbie, most of the motorists or drivers that we have interviewed earlier can't help but scratch their heads, shrug their shoulders, and feel frustrated, especially our tricycle and jeepney drivers, because according to them, they're bringing less and less earnings. One jeepney driver called for a fare increase as his earnings aren't enough to sustain their rent and daily expenses. That is why they're calling for a fare increase, Robbie.
Well, there's not much that we can do as consumers, but how about the Energy Department? What steps are they taking to soften the blow of these hikes?
Yeah, good evening to our listeners and watchers.
As for the Energy Department, they already called on Congress to revisit and amend the Deregulation Act, where the government's hands are tied to the oil price adjustments. Here's what Undersecretary Gerardo Erguiza has to say.
Yes, kami po ay nagsasuggest ng mga pamamaraan na kung sana mabigyan ang gobyerno ng power to intervene such that kung tumaas ang gasolina sa world price market, dapat meron tayong kontrol.
Robbie, Gretchen, aside from this, the DOE is batting for a provision that will allow or that can allow government to temporarily suspend the excise tax on fuel. Robbie, Gretchen.
Well, for sure, we will be skipping away the traffic lines near gas stations. Thank you so much. That was mobile journalist Pamela Vasquez reporting live to us from Marikina.
And as expected, transport groups have been making their calls louder for a fare hike.
Groups of jeepney drivers and operators are petitioning a 15 peso fare adjustment. The Liga ng mga Transportasyon at Operators sa Pilipinas says they may even call for an increase of as much as 20 pesos. That amount will help them cover the cost of buying basic goods for their families. Regardless of the final amount, the group says there must be a compromise.
Kailangan di magsalubong tayo sa kahirapan. Biktima tayo lahat ng pandemic at hanggang ngayon may pandemic pa rin. Kaya pinakiusapan ko sila na 15 pesos na lang.
With a big-time oil price hike tomorrow, should we gear up for more weeks of price increases? That big question and more with Energy Undersecretary Gerardo Erguiza Jr. Good evening, Yusek Erguiza. Welcome to The Big Story.
Good evening, Robbie. Good evening, Gretchen, and to all our viewers and listeners.
Yusek Ergiza, kanina doon sa balita natin, you mentioned sana power to intervene. What exactly does that mean?
Well, you see, alam nyo, first of all, let me say that this is a global problem. I am now in the United States and oil increased by $1 per gallon and this morning about by 19 cents. So we're all addressing this kind of problem. Now, the root of all of this, as I've mentioned, is that we have an existing law which was passed in 1998, and we call this the oil deregulation law. And under the law, it states that the cost of fuel will be based on a certain benchmark, which is the world market price. And when you sell this in retail stores, you have to first, based on this, then add up the operational, administrative, transportation, the taxes, insurance, and other costs. So this is the beginning of everything. This should be addressed, and we have called on Congress to have this amended. Of course, there are other short-term suggestions that we ask Congress, including the suspension of the excise tax, because an additional amount is being added in the value of oil. With respect to the short-term solutions, we have asked oil companies to give discounts. We have this, what we call the Pantawid Pasada program of the government. Is being managed by the LFTRB, where subsidy is given to the transport sector. And we have subsidy also to the farmers and fisher folks, which is being managed by the Department of Agriculture. Yes.
So, Yusek Ergiza, as you pointed out, we still have some options, but as you also pointed out from the very start, a lot of this is factors external to us. Given that this is a global problem, is there any way to even project how much longer we expect prices, world prices in particular, to keep going up?
Well, let me first say that we have had increases as early as October, and the main reasons that where every country is going back to their respective economic activities, and when you have these activities, you need energy, and what was hit most is the transport sector. And there's so much demand, and the production is not being coped up. The OPEC promised to produce about 400,000 more, but it's only producing 10,000 barrels a day as of now. We have the problem with Iran, which supplies 700,000, Venezuela, which supplies 400,000. This will supposedly consist of an additional 1.1 to 1.2 million, but this is not being delivered because of sanctions against them. And this, as you all know, has worsened because of the Russian-Ukraine problem. Because of this war, the supply to Europe by Russia, because they have supply contracts with Russia, is not being completely complied with. But with respect to the Philippines, we don't have any direct problem with this war, because the Philippines has no supply contract with Russia. But we are being supplied with finished products by China, Japan, and South Korea, and these countries are importing from Russia's crude oil. However, with respect to distribution, the products of Russia are brought to the Asia Pacific through supply vessels and through the pipeline connecting Russia and China.
Okay, Yusek Ergiza, maraming salamat po. That was Energy Undersecretary Gerardo Ergiza Jr. Does the rise in crude costs mean price of basic commodities will be rising as well? Gretch gives us some updates.
Bobby, some good news for today. The Department of Trade and Industry says there is no increase in prices of basic commodities, at least for the next 3 months. This despite the continuing Russia-Ukraine tension influencing global trade. According to Trade Undersecretary Ruth Castelo, the country's supply of products and raw materials are enough for the next 30 to 90 days. Should our local trade be affected, Castelo says impact will be felt after 3 months. The DTI is also looking into stockpiling basic agricultural goods such as frozen meat and pork. As of now, DTI says they are not yet seeing the need to change SRPs. Meanwhile, these are the other big stories tonight. VP Leni Robredo hits back at Cavite Representative Boying Remulla over the quote, irresponsible statement he made against her supporters after calling the attendees of the campaign rally bayaran and part of the communist movement. The Philippines is no longer one of the countries with the lowest age for sexual consent. The president inks into law a bill raising that from 12 to 16 years old. And after 2 years in Japan, Filipino gymnast phenom Carlos Yulo returns to the Philippines. He led the inauguration of a new training center for those wanting to follow in his footsteps. More of these big stories after the break.
Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. A lawmaker from Cavite attempts to cast doubts on the overwhelming support that Vice President Leni Robredo received from the vote-rich province in Cavite last week.
Congressman Boying Remulla accused the Robredo camp of paying attendees 500 pesos each to participate in their campaign rally. Gerard de la Peña tells us more in his report.
With a crowd estimate of 47,000, General Trias Cavite turned pink over the weekend during Vice President Leni Robredo's grand rally. This, even as Cavite Governor John Vic Remulla pledged 800,000 votes for the VP's rival, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. In the event, Robredo supporters had one recurring cry.
Baka bukas sasabihin na naman na bayad kayo.
But the following day, Cavite Congressman Boying Remulla made that very accusation.
Sa siyudad ng Cavite, may politiko na pagbayad na 500 sa bawat a-attend. Hinahakot eh.
Naku, di po na eh.
Tapos 500. Ang uniforme nila, siyempre pink.
For Robredo's camp, some politicians may still not be used to having genuine supporters.
Nakagawian na nila na doon sa mga rally nila talagang hakot ang kailangan nilang gawin para magkatao. Kailan tayo nakakita ng ganitong level ng partisipasyon mula sa mga ordinaryong Pilipino sa isang kampanya.
However, Remulla's accusations did not end there, as he alleged that some of the VP supporters are communists.
Ang dami nilang mga estudyante, mga aktivista,
Kaliwa.
mga trained ng NDF o training nila. May dalang mga bandera pero pink. Ang CPP, NPA, NDF, tsaka ang pink, magkakampi na.
Robredo People's Council in Cavite, however, were quick to point out that Remulla's accusations are irresponsible and damaging. The group also strongly denied that attendees were paid to attend the rally. A news report on Remulla's allegations was later retweeted by Presidential Bet Senator Ping Lacson. In his post, Lacson expressed concern that another aspirant might establish a coalition with communists. Lacson later on clarified that he never red-tagged anyone. In the middle of what was deemed as baseless accusation, the hashtag Boying Sinungaling trended on social media. Meanwhile, Robredo supporters did not fail to show up one more time, as around 45,000 supporters attended the team's grand rally in Bulacan. For News 5, Gerard de la Peña, We Are One News.
Meanwhile, Vice President Leni Robredo hit back at Representative Remulla for making, quote, irresponsible statements against her supporters in Cavite. In the Candidate Talks forum organized by Go Negosyo and Signal via One News and 1PH, VP Leni reiterated her campaign team did not pay the attendees to join the rally.
Una, wala din kaming pambayad at hindi namin yung gagawin. Kasi kung magbabayad kami na mag-a-attend, sino niloloko namin? 'Di ba? Sarili din namin yung lolokohin namin. Mas mabuti na organic yung pumupunta para yun yung na-assess mo kung gaano ka kalakas. Pero ako nalulungkot ako na magre-resort sa ganito. Na hindi pinapahalagahan yung dignidad ng mga taga-Cavite. Ito, kung may pruweba, di ilabas yung pruweba. Pero wag naman yung basta mag-a-accuse na very irresponsible. Tapos yung sabuatan, coalition ba? Sabuatan, ewan ko kung anong term ginamit. Ano yung basis? Diba? Ano yung basis? Wala ako nakita at all ng any indication na pwede kaming ma-accuse na nakikipagsabuatan kami. Insulto sa mga province mates. Nandun ako, nakita ko yung tao, yung energy level ng tao from start to finish, pagbayad yata, hindi yun ganun. Wala naman ako nakita na mga truck o mga bus na nagdadala sa mga tao. In fact, papunta doon, nakita ko ang daming naglalakad. Punong-puno na yung grounds, ang daming naglalakad papunta doon. Yung mga suot ng mga tao, iba-ibang shade ng pink, iba-ibang klase ng t-shirt, kanya-kanyang gawa ng mga campaign paraphernalia.
For the big story in sports, the reigning world champion gymnast Kaloy Yulo is back in the Philippines to take a quick break to see his family. Not only that, Kaloy even showed me around the newest training facility for his fellow gymnasts. The details in my report.
And a triple twist to finish off from Carlos Adrian Yulo.
After 2 long years, Pinoy world champion gymnast Kaloy Yulo is home. The gymnastic phenom reunited with family, supporters, and fellow athletes. He got first dibs at the new MVP Sports Foundation Gymnastics Center. At ang gagawin po namin, itutour niya ako sa bagong-bagong gymnastics center ng MVP Sports Foundation. Okay? Ano, game na ba? Huwag mo lang ako papatumbling, ha?
So ito naman po yung floor na ginagamit namin, men's and women's po.
Siyempre, yan yung expertise mo, di ba?
Ito po yung ginagamit sa World Championships and World Cups po. So ito naman po yung Pomelors. Ito po yung ginamit ng SEA Games po.
Ito yung mahirap sa'yo, no? Pero ngayon, kamusta na?
Mahirap pa din po.
The center also boasts of some of Kaloy's favorite, like the vault, the P-bar, the rings, and the high bar. Gaano kaswerte yung mga bata ngayon na meron silang ganitong fasilidad?
Swerte po ng... Lalo na po, may mga coaches po na nagtuturo na po ngayon ng 6 na aparatos. Dati po talaga floor and board na.
After After his quick break, Kaloy will be gearing up for the upcoming SEA Games where he is the reigning all-around champion. But for Kaloy, his eyes are set on the Asian Games.
Last time po kasi parang Olympics din po yung nangyari sa akin. Malaking impact po talaga sa akin yung Olympics, yung ganong pagkakamali po. Araw-araw ko pong ini-imagine yung ganong pangyayari.
Kaloy believes more of his fellow gymnasts can get high-level training at the new gymnastics center in Intramuros. What used to be a warehouse was transformed into a new training facility for up-and-coming gymnasts, just like Kaloy's younger brother Carl.
Kung hindi po niya narating yung ganito, siguro po laos na po ang gymnast ngayon at wala nang balak sumalin.
Malaki yung center, malawak. It's not too far from the center of Intramuros. It's really a tool for us to find yung mga gymnasts na pwede nating i-train na maging the next Kaloy Yulos of the Philippines.
Kaloy, ngayon na naikot na natin itong MVPSF Gymnastics Center. Anong masasabi mo sa lahat ng sumusuporta sa Philippine sports?
Gusto ko pong magpasalamat sa Panginoon na may sumusuporta sa akin. Sa amin po, dito. Wala po akong masabi kundi maraming salamat po. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Time for another quick break. More of the big stories when we return.
Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. After falling behind the international community for years, the Philippines has finally signed a measure raising the age of sexual consent from 12 to 16.
The law signed by President Duterte will strengthen the protection of minors against sexual abuse. Jenny Dongon has this story.
Up until this point, the Philippines has one of the lowest minimum age for sexual consent. With minimum age set at 12 years old, the country is just next to Nigeria's 11 years old. Family attorney Virginia Suarez says the previous law was filled with loopholes.
Pag 12 na hanggang pataas at nagkaroon ng sexual intercourse, pumayag yung bata, ano yun, yung tinatawag natin na seduction. So parang ang ibig sabihin walang rape.
But that's about to change. President Rodrigo Duterte has signed into law a bill that raises the minimum age of sexual consent to 16 years old. The move is meant to shield minors, regardless of gender, from rape and sexual abuse. After all, based on 2015 UNICEF study, 7 out of 10 rape victims in the Philippines are minors.
Sa kasalukuyang batas natin, ang age of sexual consent ay 12 pataas. Kaya nga kapag pababa, pag less than 12 yung bata, statutory rape ang tawag natin ibig sabihin nun mas mabigat ang parusa.
But the law also has exemptions. There will be no criminal liability if the age difference between the adult and the minor is 3 years or less, and there's proof that sex was consensual and that it was neither abusive nor exploitative. The rule does not apply if the minor is below 13 years old. Child and women's advocacy groups hail the new law's passage, but they want to know how this will be implemented.
Ayaw namin maging tokenism lang yung mangyayari. Karanasan namin with the different laws, 37 laws and resolutions na protecting women's rights ang naipasa dito sa bansang ito, ang implementation ay napakababa.
For News 5, Jenny Dongon, we are One News.
Another big story in sports. Over the weekend, Pinoy pole vaulter EJ Obiena set a new personal indoor best after clearing 5.91 meters for a second-place finish in the 2022 Perche Elite Tour in France. He wound up behind Tokyo silver medalist Chris Nielsen of the United States after the latter claimed gold with a personal best 6.05 meters. Obiena's result was a provisional national indoor record, breaking his own mark of 5.86 meters set last year. After his record-breaking jump, Obiena pointed to his baller, bearing the colors of the Ukrainian flag as a sign of support. Obiena's coach, Vitaly Petrov, is from Ukraine.
Jusqu'à la fin et s'inspirer aussi parfois et voir un petit peu comment chacun saute à tour de rôle. Et ça passe! Oh là 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 là! Au premier coup!
I was on a phone call with EJ last night and he told me that he may not be well versed with the details of what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, but he wants to shed the light on the issue, especially because his coach is Ukrainian and he also has several friends in Ukraine who are high jumpers who don't have food to eat na raw. So, it's a great gesture that he did, considering also that he's battling, some things on his own.
Yeah, I mean, he continues to inspire, but more importantly, as he pointed out, he has a personal connection to Ukraine via Coach Petrov. But this really also reminds us of the importance of sports. You know this as well. It's a platform for things even bigger than sports.
I love that he has a global consciousness of his impact. But today actually is also the deadline for the endorsement of Patafa if he can compete in the upcoming World Indoors. And today the mediation already started. We will be following up on that. And here's to hoping that he can still compete and make a mark in those avenues. That wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash hands.
And stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Hall. We are One News. Have a good evening.